Okay. So this is my presentation on offender narratives. So offender narratives temporarily ordered statements concerning events experienced by actions of one or more protagonists. A narrative is a self-narrative, sometimes referred to as life story or life history. So in specifically the War 2011, narratives are a metaphor for an individual's conception of their and other people's lives. They depict what is important to them. Okay. Narratives are also used by a lot of psychologists around the country to determine why and how things happened and what kind of personality the offender has and why it's important to their narrative. So then we move on to the types of narratives. So we've got adventurer, first of all, so that's enjoyable offending. So this type of offender would be fascinated by the murder. He could also do things like take trophy from a crime scene. So if he committed one murder, he could take a bracelet. Second murder, he could also take a bracelet. And little things like that. He's just getting a kick out of what he's doing. Professional narrative, expert offending. So this could be serial killing. So it could be killing more than one person, knowing what you're doing, happy about what you've done. And then when you find that you're interviewing these kind of people, they're not really emotional, they haven't really got much feeling about what's happened. So we've got revenger, so male dominance offending. So this could be really with like sexual assault and rape and things like that. The male being able to dominate somebody else, being important. And then we move on to the victim. So the victim role is having no accountability for his or her actions. They don't really have much control over their own life. There's always someone else or something else to blame for what's happened. Offending narrative is very complex and can be changed throughout the investigation. So just because someone starts off as a victim narrative doesn't mean that they're not gonna change or they're gonna stay as a victim narrative throughout the investigation or throughout the course of their life. So then we move on to values of offender narratives. They help clarify the nature of criminal behaviour and criminalisation. Narratives also incorporate aspects of the justification, cognitive distortion and other criminal thinking styles. The offence narrative framework is encompassed with the NRQ, focuses on what happens in the crime and how the offender makes sense of that. Values with offender narratives are that police interventions, police officers, criminal profilers, behaviour profilers all use them, and this is because it helps them to understand the nature of the crime and why the narratives are important to be understood. And then the limitations really, it's just a reliability of data. So sometimes offender narratives aren't always important investigations and offenders aren't always related to a narrative. It's not always used. PRESA 2009 recently articulates that the behaviour is the enhancement of narrative pursuit of the narrative itself or the motivation. So the narrative approaches have potential application within criminology that goes beyond the analysis of post hoc accounts derived from the understanding of offenders' subjective interpretation of his or her involvement in crime. So sometimes they might not know their involvement in crime or not know or understand the nature of crime, and then even things like police officers might not have enough evidence or not enough materials to put together a narrative. How do offender narratives impact decision making? So this one's really important within forensic psychology. Offenders' crime narratives, especially as revealed through the NRQ, encapsulates many aspects of the psychological processes underpinning criminal actions. Also, this is really important within police interviewing. They can put together different strategies and interviewing techniques and stuff like that when they're interviewing the offender. So understanding the narrative will help target different questions that will give things away or will help them feel like they're on their side. The offence narrative role is proposed to be then the distillation of an underlying storyline or narrative theme into a form that captures the protagonist, the offender, agency and their in relation to specific crime or event. Management and treatment of offenders. So throughout the treatment provided by when offenders are in prisons, cognitive behavioural therapy is seen as the most common one to be successful in the treatment. Offenders are more likely to respond to the approaches which attempt to construct more ideal identities against which their own identities are better understood. Narratives and narrative therapy are used in treating the forensic population, so in therapeutic communities. sexual offender treatment, psychotherapy, violence reduction programs and things like that. And that all is very important in like the psychotherapy and the desistance of treatment and working out what's better for each narrative and what will work and what won't work. So offending narratives used by forensic psychologists. So forensic psychologists are often used to determine the psychological approaches to an individual's narrative, often focusing on the specific mental states of personality disorders. So a victim narrative, an adventure narrative, things like that could all determine different personality disorders. So someone with schizophrenia or bipolar could present a narrative. They could think that the world's against them, that the crime isn't their fault, and then that will help the psychotherapist or psychologist target questions towards that mental disorder and also their narrative. Narratives in offender intervention, putting theory into practice, so psychological assessment, assistance and treatment. So narratives are used to predict future behaviour. That was Jung's Cantor 2012. One example of the forensic setting is using the HCR20, a scenario planning historical clinical risk management. Narratives enable participants to make sense of their own journey from a criminal past to a legitimate present. So moving from the old criminal self to the new law-abiding self. So helping them change their life around, making them the person they are today. So that is a transformation narrative, which Jung and Cantor said about in their articles. And then, most importantly, there's loads of case studies in the media and things like that relating to forensic psychology and how and why offender narratives are important. And one of the ones that I found very interesting was the Christopher Jeffrey, who was 51 and he's just been jailed for life after murdering his wife Sarah Jeffrey. Christopher Jeffrey played the victim narrative. He killed his wife because she said she was going to leave him, and he didn't want that to happen, so he killed her. So before this happened, she broke up with him, she moved out, she went there a few weeks later to retrieve her stuff. She took her father with her. Father waited outside just in case anything happened. They got into a fight when they was there. She said that she was leaving him. He didn't like it, he got angry, and he picked up a pair of straighteners and strangled her with a straightener's cord. At this time it happened, he didn't run outside to tell the dad it was an accident. He didn't show any remorse or any upset. He just found his mother to tell her what he'd done. So at the time of the arrest, he pleaded to manslaughter, not murder, and he said that it wasn't his fault. He did it because she was going to leave him. She was this, she was that. It was never, no intention to blame himself. So again, just like the narrative says, no accountability for his actions. He also didn't have much control over his life, hence why maybe he found his mum, things like that. So just in terms of that, this also moves on to like the values of the offenders again, and just showing that through research, for instance, Cantor and Jung's, they come up with different like victim roles, like different like other narratives. So they talk about narratives give the information how offences view the victim. So like object, no human significance of feelings. So Christopher Jeffrey didn't really have any feelings or remorse of what he did. He was saying his wife meant the world to him and she didn't want to leave him, but then he killed her with no hesitation. Vehicle, victim is a means through offences. Desires can anger, then be expressed. He's very angry towards the victim. And then person, role given to the victim close as a normal relationship. Obviously, normally when things like this happen in relationships or when there's arguments, stuff like that, there's always a reason for something to happen. It's never just the case if someone's just murdered somebody, so there's always a reason. So then moving on to questions and reflection. What was the most enjoyable part of developing this presentation? So for me, the most enjoyable part was understanding and learning about offender narratives and why they are important. Understanding who used them and why it's important for forensic psychologists to use them. Another aspect was learning about why victim narrative is so important, adventure narrative is so important, things like that. And also understanding how it links to like personality disorders and things like schizophrenia, things like that, and how narratives can be like interlinked with things like that, and then help understanding why people behave the way they behave. What did you find particularly challenging about developing this presentation? What I found particularly challenging was that the complexity of offender narratives is that like you can always change. So just because you start off as a victim doesn't mean you can't be in a bench narrative as well. And throughout investigations and interviews, stuff like that, they can change. And that was hard for me reading different articles, especially Cantor and Young's 2012 article, with the different types of transformation narratives, the different techniques used by police interviewing, and it can be very complex and can be very hard to understand. So it was very interesting, but it was hard to get my head around it. And then finally, what skills will you take forward from this experience into your future learning assessment? Background reading is key, so all the papers provided to me on Blackboard was very useful to read. Finding out background literature of the offender narratives was key to a better understanding, and also how psychologists and criminologists use them, and research really just helped me progress my knowledge and understanding why they're important, how they're used, and then how they're used in prisons and stuff like that to help offenders come back into society and not be a criminal anymore and just be an average normal person. And that's it really. All references are provided at the bottom, and that is it. Thank you.